Welcome to the Information Security Forum videocast. I'm your host, Tavia Gilbert, and today we are featuring ISF Managing Director Steve Durbin in conversation with Michelle Myauo, Director of Cybersecurity for the Global Cybersecurity Practice at Microsoft, and a Professor of Engineering Management and Systems Engineering with a focus on cybersecurity policy and compliance. In this interview, Michelle discusses the preparedness of the C-suite to respond to cybercrime, embedding a holistic approach into the enterprise, credential theft, and more.
Michelle, hi. Thanks very much for stopping by. I'd like to start by asking you one of my perhaps most often asked questions. Businesses and governments, are they really ready to respond strategically and appropriately to cybercrime, in your opinion?
I would say yes. I think it all comes down to, developing a corporate strategy and really embracing cybersecurity as part of that corporate strategy, understanding that either you're under attack and you know it, or you're under attack and you don't know it, but you're likely under attack. So that's usually the case we find both industry and governments in. We respond to attacks after a cyber attack has occurred. We evict the attacker and help them clean up after attack and rebuild the environment. But we really want to be in there proactively would be the goal. So that way we can help them, design securely, kind of, follow SDL principles, follow the NIST cybersecurity principles, and ensuring that their corporate strategy contains protect, detect, respond, recover, and that they're proactively mitigating against those things.
And what are some of the challenges that you face in doing that? I mean, skills presumably is one of them.
Yes, I would say, up until a few years ago, cybersecurity isn't something well understood by most of the C-suite, right? That's some stuff that happens down the hall with those IT folks, right? Who are likely in the basement in the very cold room. So, with the elevated, I would say, media around cybersecurity and cyber attack, I equate cyber attacks to kind of, the new bank robbery, right? Where there's money, there will be criminals. Where there's opportunity, there will be criminals. And when you talk about nation states, I think it's really interesting because one country's cyber espionage is another country's cyber defense. So it, depending on when you're having a global conversation about it, it gets really interesting, I think.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit more about that because, of course, when we think about cybercrime, we tend to categorize it into those two blocks, right? The guys who are in it for the money, the traditional criminals, and then of course you've got the state-sponsored side of things. And I think that people generally understand that there's a much higher level of capability with a state-sponsored attack. Any sort of tips that you can give to organizations that think they might be on that sort of hit list from a state-sponsored perspective?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is about 99% of the attacks we respond to in Microsoft services has some element of credential theft.
Right.
And, I think that's because credential theft is a lot of architectural debt over the years, and it's not sexy to remediate, right? It really is, talking about how many administrators you have, combing down those number of administrators, setting up need-to-know principles, classifying your data. So that's kind of, we equate to cybersecurity, that's like the eat your vegetables, exercise every day type thing. And a lot of the reasons, we don't go to the gym, it's too hard, it costs too much, does it really help me, are the same reasons I think we don't proactively implement cybersecurity mitigations.
So how do we overcome that?
That inertia?
Yeah.
I think the more we talk about it, the better it becomes, we almost feel inundated, and I think people have this inertia and they feel helpless a little bit that, there's a cyber attack every single day, so why bother, right? But I think that the truth is that the organizations that will win in the decades to come are those that not only implement the cyber mitigations but they make it part of their corporate strategy. So that way it's something that we planfully do every single year or twice a year and budget for and things like that.
So you're talking about embedding this into the business DNA, right?
Yes.
From the board right the way down. Something of a holistic approach to really putting up the the barriers to, I suppose, really making an organization look unattractive. I mean, when I talk about it, I always say you want to be the most unattractive organization out there so that somebody will move on to the next one and just leave you be. Is that fair, do you think? Is that really what we're trying to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's fair. Some cyber criminals are looking for an easy target, just like any type of crime, right? If your door's open, somebody might walk in. But if they see the security monitoring system outside and they see cameras in your home, they may go to an easier target, as a less soft target.
That's a pretty comprehensive approach, though, isn't it, that we're talking about here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the one of the best sources, and I like to talk about a lot of open source data, so that way it's just not all Microsoft-centric, is the NIST cybersecurity framework. And I think even at a global level, that plays pretty well. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technologies, I know you're aware. And the Identify, Protect, Detect, Respond, Recover. That framework was developed with industry, academia, governments involved, and it's kind of a nice framework to begin with.
And it's really popular. I mean, it's reached a huge adoption rate.
Yes. Yeah, so I think, when an organization is like, what can I do? They should read the NIST cybersecurity framework and say, hey, am I doing anything within this framework? Am I really proactively identifying where I have risk? Am I proactively putting in proactive measures and monitoring and securing by design? Do I have detective measures? And if I can detect when a cyber attack happens, am I ready to respond?
Right. Now, you've advised a whole variety of different organizations, from business through academia into government. Is there a difference in how each of those different constituent areas or parts need to respond to cyber threats or not?
I think it's interesting. I'd mentioned at the onset a little bit about credential theft.
Right.
Across all, industry, academia, and governments, we see credential theft as at least, if not the key attack vector, one of the attack vectors within the entire attack. Because really, if you assume that an attacker will get in your environment, they may get a workstation here and there. What you don't want them to get is the keys to the kingdom, right? Where you have that crown jewel information, the domain admin. So it really is about assuming breach and planning from there.
And that's pretty much across every
that's across,
right?
Yeah. And some organizations are a little bit more secure. I mean, if you look at open source data on the U.S. federal government, it's openly known that they classify their data, and that there's different networks. So of course, there's a different level of sophistication with larger global businesses or governments. There tend to be. But in general, if you're looking at, have we secured, have we done credential partitioning? Are we protecting our highest value assets? And are we continuously reevaluating what those high value assets are? Then it's pretty ubiquitous when it comes to credential hygiene.
Is it a technical solution that we're trying to provide to this problem, or is it very much more than that?
I think it's both. So, I have a psychology background,
right.
And then in systems engineering. So I really think that, a lot of the technology solutions exist. And it's really trying to speak plainly about the issue so others can understand. And so that way other people can get behind it. I find that education is really important because people are like, oh gosh, cybersecurity, I don't even know where to begin. But if we in the cyber field can talk about it plainly and provide these types of open source data for people to read and research and kind of digest a little bit on their own. Like for example, Microsoft, we have the Pass the Hash white papers 1 and 2. That's free advice that people can take a look at and read in advance to try to educate themselves on what types of questions to ask and where to begin.
So I wanted to ask you some questions really about the future of, in particular, artificial intelligence. Machine learning today, clearly, not developed to the extent that with true AI. But does it have a future, do you think, in terms of helping us as security professionals really combat some of the threats that we've just been talking about?
Definitely. I think definitely. If you look at the Microsoft Digital Crimes Unit, for example, we run a 24/7 operation that is monitoring threats. That's not my particular group, but we leverage their data. right? So we offer our clients a services solution where we can leverage the telemetry that we gather from there on emerging threats based off of all our sensors, and look at somebody's environment and see where there may be some of those emerging threats. So I think as the algorithms get more sophisticated and as the data continues to learn, then we will be able to kind of get ahead of some of these things maybe we hadn't been able to get ahead of. I think what's nuanced about that is, that the other piece really is you have to know what normal is in your environment, right? To know what not normal is. Yeah. So I think there's still a large element of change management and strategy and understanding that really needs to be implemented with AI. And I know, for example, at the Grace Hopper conference, they talked a lot about how AI can be dangerous. And we've all seen some instances where, artificial intelligence had learned from data that it was being fed, and it, turned out being not sensitive to our humanity, really being racist and things like that. Which isn't
absolutely.
Helpful.
And some projects have been closed down, haven't they? Because perhaps they weren't coming up with the right treatment plans. I'm thinking particularly in the medical space where these trials have been going on. So for me anyway, when I look at it, I think it isn't just about the future that AI can provide for us. It's about a much more collaborative environment between the human interface and AI, using machine learning and artificial intelligence to really plug those gaps that we're not very good at, but then using the human side to plug the gaps that AI isn't very good at the moment. Would you agree with that position?
Yes, I would agree with that. And I also think we need to look at who our AI is being developed by, right? The more diverse in experience and, the normal diversity, types of things like, gender, race, et cetera, but also diversity of experiences is really important in AI. So that way it's not slanted just towards a particular view, because we're all going to be impacted by the results that the AI produces. So I think, when we kind of look at the algorithms and who we're getting involved in developing it, we really need to make sure we take that human perspective on it, because it really is a human technology interface.
So we've talked about this combination of technology and human interface. One of the things that strikes me though is that is that not really the realm of the big corporation? I mean, if you're an SME, how can you possibly hope to gain access to some of these skill sets, some of these technologies? I mean, what advice would you give to an SME who may be sitting there listening to this or watching this?
Yeah, I think it's really important to acquire cyber expertise. In real cyber expertise. Cybersecurity isn't a job for your favorite management consultant. You should look at the folks who this is their mission, I think, and see how best to leverage them. Organizations like Microsoft or your Amazons or your IBMs. There's a lot of groups that have large security presence, and there's also a lack of cybersecurity professionals in the industry. Things like by 2019, we're going to have a deficit of 6 million. We need 6 million more cybersecurity professionals. So I think it's kind of looking at what your core mission is and saying, hey, is this something that we hire internally for, hire somebody or a group of somebody's for, or is this something where we outsource this function? But even if you outsource it, you still need to have somebody who has some cybersecurity knowledge internally to try to identify what pieces you need for your strategy. So that's why we really encourage people to have a CISO, right, a Chief Information Security Officer, in order to be able to identify what the strategy needs to contain, and in order to acquire the appropriate talent, whether it be partnerships, with other organizations like Microsoft, or hiring some of these folks internally.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make there about really having some kind of capability, irrespective of the size of organization. I think that all too often, particularly for small to mid-sized companies, they think that by outsourcing it, they can really hand off the problem to somebody else, and that isn't the case, right? You still have to have and retain some ownership of these things, because after all, it's your data, it's your responsibility to look after it. Let's talk a little bit about Chief Information Security Officers in general. Are they doing enough, do you think, to really ensure that on the whole, organizations are able to understand some of the things we've been talking about from the boardroom right the way down? And are they able to mature their organizations fast enough to respond to some of these threats that we've just been touching on?
Yes. I'd like to think people do the best they can with the information they have, right?
Yeah.
So, I'd like to think that a lot of these CISOs, they want help if they don't know what they're doing, or if they don't know what to do in a particular situation. They're seeking help, right? So I think the more that we can help educate CISOs and provide information out there for them to read up on, to help educate themselves, then that is a really important element. Some people have a really hardcore tech background, right? Some CISOs come from a hardcore tech background. Others have business degrees. But in general, they all know how to speak the language and mechanics of cyber. And that's the most important thing, I think. Cybersecurity is such a broad field, right? From reverse engineer to policy analyst to cybersecurity lawyer. So one person, you generally don't find that unicorn, right?
No, absolutely.
It's a whole broad range of skill set there. So I think what's important is trying to find somebody who has a holistic understanding of it and understands where they may need more or less assistance, and not be afraid to ask those questions. I think that's the thing that we could all do better, is talk more about what cybersecurity challenges we're having, because attackers are talking, right? So
yeah, as we know, they're very good at collaborating. They're very
are.
good at sharing information, and we could probably learn from that, right?
yes.
Michelle, thank you very much indeed for coming along and spending some time just talking about some of those really interesting issues, giving us some insights as to how Microsoft is perhaps working with some of the largest organizations in the world around trying to fix these problems, and just spending time sharing your insights. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve. I appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to our videocast with Steve Durbin in conversation with Michelle Myauo. For more videocasts, podcasts, and other resources for CISOs and anyone looking to enhance the security of their business, please visit securityforum.org. And we'd like to hear from you. If there's a topic you'd like us to cover or someone you'd like us to interview, get in touch through our website or tweet us at Security Forum. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.